Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the Air Force Association's annual Airspace and Cyber Conference and Trade Show outside Washington, D.C., the leading gathering of Air Force leaders from around the world to talk about the service's future, its strategy, policies, technology, and budgets. Our coverage here is sponsored by Elbit Systems of America, L3 Technologies, and Leonardo DRS, and we're honored to have with us the commander of the Air Combat Command, General Mobile Holmes. Sir, thanks very much. Always a pleasure seeing you.
Hi, Vago. Great to see you. It's not quite an AFA for me without doing this with you.
Well, the feeling is very, very mutual. Over the years, I've really enjoyed our conversations. And one of the things that, I know the message from the chief has been, focusing on great power competition, the multi-domain battle. And then we also heard from the Secretary, the new goal, 74 more squadrons, bring that number up to 386. And I want to ask you a little bit about that. But ultimately, the entire service leadership has been kind of working toward that great power goal now for a couple of years. I know that you saw that as a priority. Hawk Carlisle, your predecessor, was working on it. I know I talked to Dewey Everhard about it and his relief. General Miller, we had a great conversation and she was talking a little bit about it. The question I want to ask you is sort of following up on a conversation that we've had in the past, which is, throughout its history, or for many decades, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, you had to go out, you didn't have to come back. Everybody in the Air Force understood that it was going to take big losses. Throughout the Cold War, the service knew it was going to lose bases in this exchange of fire in a contested environment. The ethos of the service was shaped by wartime leaders who had experienced significant losses that were training generations of leaders. Now for 20 years, we've been the world's most dominant Air Force. It's been able, you've been able to command the skies, command space, command cyberspace even for a large piece of that. But now we're getting back into a much more contested environment. How are you doing that, given that, even leaders like you early in your career the Cold War was pretty much almost ending by the time you got there? How are you reinstilling this combat ethos that permeated a lot of the service's history because of just the experiences of folks through time? How are you doing that? I mean, what are your reference materials as you go do that?
So I'd agree with you that war between great powers, full conflict between great powers is unimaginable to most of us. It's hard to imagine what that would actually be like and contemplate it. But we know we haven't had one for 70 plus years, and the reason is because we've been able to avoid it by being successful in a competition. So first, our goal is to try to avoid fighting that great power conflict by casting this competition that we're in now with peers, with Russia, with China, on terms that will be more favorable to us. And so we'll start to do that. And in 1942, when the first guys went to try to go bomb Germany and do those things, they didn't have a history either. And they learned to do it, and they were trained to do it. There's a saying that people use that so-and-so rose to the occasion. My experience has been it doesn't really happen that way. What happens is people sink to the level of their character and training. So they fall back on their skills, they fall back on the things that they've rehearsed. And so we'll be focused on training in realistic scenarios to try to build a readiness and to try to make sure that we can do all that we can to avoid that great power conflict.
How do you gauge success in this, right? I mean, you've been working on this. The exercises have been getting a lot more demanding, much more short notice, much more complex in their integration. You're denying comms in a way to force people, mission command, what did the boss say, and what are our goals and intentions? How are you measuring that ultimately? Because if you can't measure it, you can't improve it.
ACC has a history of trying to train in what we call contested, degraded, and operationally limited environments. We've gotten away from it a little bit in the last 15 years because we've been focused on that next rotational deployment and trying to make sure that every single bomb that's dropped is in the right place and that we've delivered it with full respect for the consequences of collateral damage. And so as you pointed out, we're shifting our focus back toward thinking about how to operate more in that contested, degraded environment. So we use the great facilities we have at the National Test and Training Range out in the Nellis area. We use ranges like the range in Alaska and our backyard ranges to try to start regaining that skill set to go against a peer adversary and the kind of technologically sophisticated threats they can bring, but also to think about fighting without being able to talk to each other, fighting in the presence of GPS jamming, fighting in the presence of political or operational limits of where you can fly and where you can't fly. An example is what our airmen have been doing over Syria for the last couple of years, where they're flying in the midst of Russian airplanes, Syrian guys flying the same airplanes the Russians are, RPAs from multiple nations, and trying to sort through, keep up with who's who, make sure they don't escalate a conflict when it's not required, but make sure they're ready for when that Iranian RPA or a Syrian fencer decides to come poke its nose someplace where it shouldn't. I think you measure that by not by just activity. So in the past, we've fallen back on, we fly so many times a month, we do an exercise every 3 months, and we measure our preparation by activity. Things that we're doing in the training world, you may have heard Steve Quast, my friend from Air Education and Training Command, talk about their things they're using artificial intelligence and monitoring of our folks' training. Now you can see exactly how a member performs. You can see how they perform under stress, and that'll let us move to a world where we measure our readiness by performance and not just by activity. Imagine a world where we have a computerized range training system that doesn't just provide threats, but it measures your performance against those threats. And so we'd have a record where we can go back and say, pilot A is full up and good to go. They're ready to go operate against China tomorrow if they have to. Pilot B meets the standard in these 5 areas, and we want to focus their next week's training on this other area where they don't meet it. So we think there are opportunities to move from a activity-based measurement to performance-based and how folks are really doing.
How do you gauge readiness, right? I mean, the last couple of years have been very good. There's been some money that's been going into training. You guys have been doing a lot of that. Talk to us a little bit about where you fall on that continuum now. You know, how much more improved are you? How much more do you have to go?
So the government, the department provided us the resources to buy back our missing maintenance manpower. That was the first step. You have to have the people to be able to generate the training opportunities that you need to train your operators. That's done. The next step is to train them from entry-level maintainers up to being more proficient maintainers that can work on their own. And we're working through that, and we're providing more home station time by limiting the number of exercises we support when we're not deployed to make that training happen and be able to catch up. Once you get to that point, then we'll have to make sure that we're marrying the sustainment capability up with the aircraft or the weapon system that we're training with to be able to train at the rate that we need to get the proficiency. And I think we have the maintenance people. We're working through that training. If you look across Air Combat Command in 18, we're making progress at flying toward the activity goals that we need to be ready. In 19, I'd expect to see us make significant more progress toward being ready to meet the goals that Secretary Mattis and Secretary Wilson have set forth.
I'm getting the high signs. So it's 2 quick questions. Quick question number 1 is 74 extra squadrons. That burden is going to fall on you on the Combat Air Force side. It looks like for bombers, you know, for those of us who are trying to divine squadron increases, that might be 180, might be a number that might be comfortable with. How are you going to get there? What are the kind of resources you're needing, right? The empirical work is in. The Secretary has said what the number is. But all over this whole, you know, as you know, as folks have said to you, is, hey, man, where are you going to get the money, and how much money are you going to need to realize this? Do you know what the bill is going to be for ACC, and what are some of the things that you can do within your own confines as a MAJCOM commander to try to free up some of that resources that helps you get to that target?
So first I'd start with the task, and the task was from the Congress to deliver a report back to them on what the force structure of the Air Force should be to be able to execute the National Defense Strategy. And so that's what we've done. They didn't say come back and tell us what force you would build to fit under this budget cap, which is what we historically have done. Right. They said tell us the force you need, and we've taken the first steps toward doing that. And now, as the Chief and Secretary have said, we expect to have a conversation and a dialogue with the Department of Defense and with the Congress over where we take that information and how we decide to fill it in. In Air Combat Command, you know, we continue to focus on trying to put the resources together for sustainment like I talked about. If we're going to fly to more activity to meet the Ready Aircrew Program requirements for training for our crews, then we have to be able to sustain the airplanes to be able to do that. And then we prioritized our training, and we've dropped off exercises that are not at the high priority, and we'll stop doing them. That's saving money, but it's really saving more time and resources for our people that need the training. The funds are going to have to come if we're going to increase our readiness. If you look at the air superiority advantage that the Joint Forces lived on for the last 25 years, it was funded beginning at the Reagan administration, and it cost about an extra $8 billion a year for about 8 to 10 years, and then we lived off of that for another 20 years after that. So there's some amount of investment that is inescapable, but we'll continue to try to do it as efficiently as we can.
Last question on modernization. F-35 is a major priority of yours to try to get as quickly as possible to that 5th generation force. You have a lot of 4th generation airplanes that deliver capability but are getting daily more expensive to operate. We asked this question of Dr. Roper as well, whether or not a major muscle movement may be necessary, but given that you're looking at exponential increases in cost when they're hitting this age mark of 30, 40-year-old airplanes. From your standpoint, what are the things that you can do to try to accelerate F-35 into the force, and do you need to just put a moratorium or ground planes now that are flying in order to free those resources to get to that Air Force you need as quickly as possible?
So we've tried that in years past. We tried it in what we called the fighter redux that happened in the teens, shortly after the turn of the century, and we tried trading force structure to pay our bills, and the money went other places. We tried again in 2013 to offer a budget into the Department of the Congress that would trade some current force structure to try to get to modernization. The Air Force even made the mistake of trading manpower to try to get to modernization. So what I'd tell you is that doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is combatant commanders still have daily requirements for all the capabilities we provide, and Congress, our board of directors, recognizes that. So we have been given the funding to modernize much of that aging fleet of 4th and 5th generation fighters. We have to put money into them every year to keep them relevant, and we have to put money into the sustainability. That does then create a trade-off between being able to acquire new airplanes. The Air Combat Command commander would like to be purchasing airplanes at about 100 a year. During the peak of the F-16 buy, we bought 180 a year, and that's how you revolutionize the life and the age and the sustainment costs in your fleet. But I know that there are competing demands in the Air Force. We have nuclear recapitalization to play. We have to focus on the changes in the warfighting environment in space. We have to look at the infrastructure across the Air Force that we traded modernization in order to keep paying our bills and go through this last 25 years of combat. So they're tough decisions that have to be made. We'll continue to advocate for the warfighter as we see it, and then people in the Department of Defense, people at the headquarters of the Air Force, people in the Congress have to make tough decisions.
You satisfied with where the F-35 is now?
The F-35 coming off the line now is a great airplane, and our pilots that fly it are very happy with the capabilities it brings. There's more to delivering a 5th generation airplane than just the airplane. There's Alice, the way it communicates with the support structure. There's the planning tools that go with it. There's the bomb racks and all the other pieces. So the airplane is great. It's meeting our goals. We'll continue to work through the areas where it has some shortfalls, and we'll get those fixed. We want to keep the pressure on all the other parts that go with it.
When are you going to qualify in it?
I don't think I'll get to. I fly the T-38, and that's about right for an old man. So great talking to you.
Great talking to you, sir. Thanks very much.